That's a lot of people. Hi, my name's Bart, and I'm going to tell you something about autism and working in IT today. And this will be based on my own experiences. My psychologist told me to get outside of my own comfort zone sometime, but I doubt that this is what he had in mind. I practiced that joke. I practiced that one as well. Who am I? Well, obviously you know, my name is Bart Bruijn. I'm 42 years old for the time being. I turned 43 in November. I work in IT for YaWorks. I know this is not supposed to be a sales pitch, but I had to get out there. And I was diagnosed with autism last year during the summer. So that's me, and obviously the dinosaur from Toy Story hates me. So, what are we going to talk about today? I will give you some context on autism. Like Niels mentioned, I'm not a doctor. I don't want to be one, but you have to have some context, otherwise the rest of the story won't make any sense. I will tell you something about myself and working in IT, what the strengths of people with autism is, and then there will be some time for Q&A, depending on how hungry everybody is. So, what gets you an autism diagnosis? This is very important, and you will know later why that is. There's a couple of areas where you have to score sufficiently in order to get diagnosed with autism. And this consists out of having persistent deficits in social communication and interaction. I guess that one's obvious. For instance, I don't like looking at people, which is kind of a telltale for people with autism. You have to have restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. If you ever find yourself spending days on end with something you really like, that might be an indicator. Symptoms must be present in early developmental periods, so they have to manifest themselves when you're a child. Now, this is obviously interesting since I was diagnosed with autism last year, and well, some people may think I'm a child, but honestly I'm not. Symptoms have to cause clinically significant impairment in functioning. This one can be tricky, and I will explain later why that is. And the most important one is that all of the above is not better explained by intellectual impairment or developmental delay. So this is basically a diagnosis that you get if nothing else applies. Sort of. Right. So what isn't autism? As I mentioned in the previous slide, there's a bunch of things you have to qualify for in order to get an autism diagnosis. So having someone who's fond of organizing things, or someone who's enthusiastic about a hobby, someone who doesn't like crowd or noise, or someone who doesn't quite fit in, that's not necessarily autism. The way autism is defined nowadays is that they say it's a spectrum disorder. And along that spectrum, there's other people with other diagnosis that can be there as well. ADHD is one of the other ones, for example. So whenever you say, well, my inner autistic person went off because this didn't make sense, please stop doing that. That's not very nice. And autism is also more than just a collection of symptoms. It is basically a life-defining situation where you find yourself in, because to people with autism, the world looks different. And I hope to introduce you to that bit. So, cause and prevalence. Well, the cause is that autism has a neurological basis, primarily in information processing. During the first 2 years of your life, you have an event called synaptogenesis. That means that your brain is producing a lot more brain cells than it needs to be. And afterwards, you have synaptic pruning, which gives birth to this, the saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. For instance, if you start playing the violin at a very early age, you become better at it than when you start later on. That has to do with that same phenomenon. Now the idea is that something during that synaptic pruning goes wrong, and that's where autism stems from. More specifically, autism is not learned behavior. We are definitely wired differently. We experience the world in a different way. We deal with inputs differently, we internalize things differently, we think differently, we're very detail-oriented, for example. Prevalence, well, roughly 1% of the people has it, as we know now. Well, there are give or take 200 people here, so there should be at least 2 people with autism here. I'm one, who's the other one? In contrast, about 4 or 5% of the people has ADHD. What complicates matters is that, well, as with most medical diagnoses, autism looks different in women. I can't tell to that because I'm not female, but it looks different with women. As I mentioned earlier, people with autism and ADHD share part of the spectrum. Some of the symptoms that we have are shared. You can have both, by the way, although that doesn't really matter because, well, it's on the spectrum, right? So either you're on the spectrum or you're not. And also interesting, we know that people with autism tend to gravitate towards tech. Why exactly that is, not entirely sure. I guess it has to do because it's less people-y and more tech, but that's just a guess. So, my story. See if you can spot the sore thumb sticking out. That would be me. So my story. From an early age, I've never really felt like I fit in. And how is this, well, what does it look like? For instance, you get picked last for when you're doing sports or teams or football or whatever. You get picked on quite a lot. People with autism are very easy to trigger. Apparently, kids like bullying people who are easy to trigger. Surprisingly, choking the life out of someone takes care of that, but it's not recommended. So yeah, that kind of gives you a childhood where you exist, you function, but you don't really fit in, which makes you feel alone and misunderstood. For example, if I were to talk about something that I found interesting with my peers or people of my age, they would look at me like, "What are you saying? Why are you thinking about this?" If that happens often enough, you stop sharing that. And this is something that is very important to recognize. People with autism, some of it is because it's a biological function. The other half is because your surroundings condition you to behave in a certain way, which doesn't really fit who you are. I also had academic challenges, despite being considered very intelligent. I will not say how intelligent, and even smart people can do stupid things, so there's that too. And how do you cope with that? Well, you learn to mask, and masking is a phenomenon where you assume a certain identity or way of behavior that doesn't get you targeted. And that's the best way I can describe it. So people have expectations of you, whether academically or socially or whatever, and you try to develop a schema with items that you do in order not to get picked on. So whenever I'm talking to someone, and this is automatic now because I've been doing it for a while, but earlier on you have to recognize what gets you targeted, or people look at you like you're weird, or not. So when I'm talking to someone, I will ask myself, should I look at them? Because eye contact I find incredibly annoying. Should I laugh? Should I crack a joke? Should I not laugh? Or am I being too funny now? Or something else? Because like any person with psychological challenges, I use humor to deflect my issues. So that doesn't really work all that well all the time. But also, if you have to think about how to behave yourself, and you're concerned more with how you present yourself rather than having the energy to think about what you're doing, that takes an incredible amount of energy, and that really takes it out of you. More so in a very public setting where I have to be really considerate about what I do and what I say. So how did I end up in IT? Well, my background is chemistry and psychology. I didn't finish either of them, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Afterwards, I started working at a small IT MSP company. That's where I met Job Snijders. Actually, I met him at the psychology study at the University of Amsterdam. Well, Job Snijders is obviously well known. I didn't have any affinity with networking or IT or whatever. I mean, of course, I built my own computer, but who doesn't, honestly? No pressure there. So I got the opportunity, and also I taught myself how networking works, what MPLS is, how you enable MPBGP, various IGPs, and all of the likes. Got introduced with layer 2 networking, and I really wish I didn't. I worked there for a while. I switched jobs. I kept learning things, most important of which is Python, which I find very amusing and enjoyable. Also, please don't use Python 2 anymore. And I ended up as an IT consultant or a specialist for the past 8 years. Being a consultant is, for me, a relatively perfect fit. And whenever someone with autism says perfect, it's an approximation of perfect, because we think very binary. Either something is really good, or it's not good, and therefore shit. So, yeah. Take that with a grain of salt. And now, why is being a consultant so good for me? Well, like I mentioned earlier, I kind of stand out. You wouldn't necessarily say so if you saw me in public, but that's because I'm trying very hard to keep that from you. It's kind of like the iceberg phenomenon. You see one or two things sticking above water. That's the thing you see. Then underwater, there's the thing that sinks your ship, right? So yeah, that's autism and people who mask in a nutshell. But why is being a consultant a perfect fit for me? Well, I get to change jobs regularly or different projects, which means that, well, you kind of stand out already. So, right, you're an external brought in to fix something or make things better or create order where there is none, which is also a good one. So that kind of caters towards me, where I don't necessarily have to fit in with an existing crowd. I mean, I'll join people at the coffee corner and talk about football, but, well, you do what you got to do, right? But yeah, so it caters towards me not having to fit in exactly, but also it allows me to do stuff that I really like and really enjoy doing, which is the other part of being a consultant, because you're brought in to fix something or provide hands-on experience. So that fits relatively well. So, to give you a little bit more of an example of what autism looks like, what are my challenges while working in IT? Reading people or email. Funny enough, it doesn't really matter which one it is, because if a person responds to what I say or I speak with someone, it's difficult for me to fully grasp how they react to it. I mean, I can see if someone gets angry with me, because you can see their way of behaving change, right? But if they don't do that, then, well, what are they thinking? I mean, I need visual feedback from someone in order to understand how they're experiencing something, and even then it's a best guess. Now with people, you actually have someone you can look at where you have that type of feedback, possibly. With email, you don't. There can be a line of text, and it can mean one simple thing, but I can think of 1,000 different ways of which you can read that and understand that. Now, thank God for smileys, but there's also people who don't use them, which is really annoying. Cubicle culture, or the typical kantoortuin. Most people with autism, and me specifically, we handle stimuli very different from other people. If I'm in a cubicle culture office and somebody's talking, doesn't matter what it is, I pick it up. Someone's talking about something else, I pick it up as well. If I pick up a conversation, I'm like, well, actually, you're supposed to do it like that, I will say it. This is usually frowned upon. Being diplomatic is also an issue. I tend to say things as I perceive them. So if something is good, I'll let you know. If something is bad, I will also let you know. The former is usually not a problem, the latter more so. Educating people, I have the tendency, if I hear someone talking about something and I'm like, well, that's not entirely correct. Actually, it's like this and that, and you should do things like this. For instance, if someone starts talking about their layer 2 network and I'm like, well, act like a grown-up, redesign it into layer 3, it tends to make people feel stupid or offended or both. Half the time I can't tell. Masking or fitting in, overthinking, this is also a good one. Like for instance, the email example, if there's a single line of text and I can read that 1,000 different ways, that's a classic example of overthinking. It has its benefit as well. If, for instance, if you're starting a migration or something where you go through all of the different scenarios, but I'll get to that later. Imposter syndrome. Part of masking is that you hide who you are or how you experience things. Imposter syndrome means that, well, what if someone finds out that I'm secretly somebody else? and I'm not 007, but just some guy with autism, right? That constant fear is also something that can drain a lot of energy. So this is really a challenge. If I have a couple of those days in a row, then I really need to like zone out and fix myself. Also, another challenge is that I can become irrationally angry about something small. And this ties back into the, if it's not 100% good, then it's bad and entirely bad. If something doesn't go my way, even though I specifically planned or engineer it to do that, yeah, that ticks me off. That's why I do kickboxing once a week. Of course, there's more than one challenge, so second slide, continued. Typical for people with autism is that you focus on details. Now, this has an upside. You look at the details. The downside is there's so many focus on details that there's not so much big picture. This is really something I have to work on for myself. I get lost in the details quite easily. I get sidetracked quite easily. A nice term for that is side quests. For instance, I can think of, oh, I'm gonna go get some coffee, and then I get sidetracked along the way with cleaning something up or looking at something, or there's an article in the newspaper, and I'm like, oh, I can read that. Or my phone alerts me that there's some social media interaction that I really should look at, but you don't. But hey, you get sidetracked, right? But also another challenge, who do you tell you have autism? I don't think that there's a good answer to that. It really depends. And that's something that you'll have to figure out for yourself when you have autism. Most of my coworkers know, my employer knows, my girlfriend knows, obviously. Also another challenge, I have very good motivation for things I like doing. The downside is that I don't have any motivation at all for things I don't like doing. Now when it comes to work, this can be an issue, right? Because some things you just have to do, like writing time. Autistic shutdown, brain fog, over or understimulation, they all boil down to the same thing really. Like I mentioned earlier, people with autism process the world differently. And autistic shutdown or brain fog is a result of that. If you get too much thrown at you all at once, that can trigger a response, either the classical kicking and screaming, which is what I don't do. The other one is that you kind of withdraw within yourself and you don't interact anymore. Doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. And then there's of course depression. Yeah, I think that speaks for itself. So, that was all the bad. Now some good. People with autism, although they perceive the world differently and have issues with social interaction, we can actually function and thrive in that surrounding. You would be surprised to know that people with autism are mostly honest, caring, and hardworking, and very genuine, bordering direct and blunt. And most importantly, even though we lack social adaptability, we don't lack empathy. I mean, if we see that someone, for instance, is going through something that makes them sad, we know that they're sad. We just don't know how to deal with that. Also, we're usually very analytical, creative, and detail-focused. That really has its benefits in some scenarios. For instance, if you're going through software testing or migration scenarios or different things where you really have to have a focus on detail, that's where people like me shine. That's what we're really good at. And also, we can thrive, but please meet us halfway. Typically speaking, we live in a neurotypical world, that's the majority of you, and then there's some neurodivergent people, that's people like me. And we're always expected to fit into the neurotypical world. But it would be really nice if the neurotypical world would also move towards us every now and then. So quit cubicles, don't do them. Working at home is also a very good one because you don't have all the additional stress. But yeah, like I mentioned, we see and experience the world differently. So for instance, if it's on a personal level and I can tell that you're upset or stressed or something is really important to you, that part I can tell, but I don't have any idea on how to deal with what you need. So tell me, be explicit. Tell me what you need from me. I can't see what you need. I can tell if something is wrong or that something is important to you, but I don't know what you need, so please tell me. And also when communicating, be very specific. Don't infer or imply or be very subtle about something, because I will miss it. If you start a sentence, well, it would be nice if, yeah, cancel that. It's not happening. No, take out the vacuum the house, and we're done. That's how it works. Yeah, I found this quote during one of my many searches on the internet about more information for an autism diagnosis. It's almost like a language, right? Because neurodivergent people like me, we can speak neurotypical, we can fit into a neurotypical world, but we speak it with an accent. You can tell. If you have someone in your who has autism, you probably already know what the triggers are: not making eye contact, fidgeting, not wanting to go out all that often, disappearing from the radar every once in a while, have difficulties maintaining friendships or other relationships. So, yeah, that's how you can tell. And last but not least, are there any questions? This is my dog, by the way.
Thank you for standing up with this, Bart. And you could hear a pin drop during your presentation.
Yep.
There are questions. Erik, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to applaud you on bringing this out in the open. I have a personal question for you on how do you unwind from all the things you need to deal with in the day-to-day? What makes you happy? Your own place? What kind of sports do you do to reload?
Well, I have a dog. I take him for walks quite often, which is good for the dog and good for me as well. Yeah, gaming, sports, stuff like that. Something I can focus my attention on and can enjoy, and provides just the right amount of stimulation. That's how I cope with it.
All right.
But
thanks.
it may be different for other people.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, I think there are different categories of people of people who are perhaps not your group, but have a lot of the same things in life they run into, like ADHD, you said, ADD, people with misophonia, if that's the English term for it. Well, what you're doing is you're a consultant. I'm not sure if you have your own say in where you're going or where you're not going. I'm a contractor as well. One of the things that I sometimes find a challenge is that if you work at a certain place, like if you would have a normal job instead of being a contractor, it's easier to come into a safe environment where people can move halfway, people know about you and everything. But if you are a contractor and move to a new environment every year and a half, how do you cope with surviving that? Because that will take extra energy. It will be a new place where you have to find your place, everything. So
it depends, and I can really only answer that from my own perspective. My schemas for, well, behaving in a social setting are quite good. So even though it's not something that comes naturally to me, I can cope with it. But I think that in the end, it's the most important thing that if you've accepted that you have autism with all the challenges that come with it, that the next step would be that you find or try to find a place where they can accommodate what you need. And I think that especially in this day and age, it's not that unacceptable for employers to reach out and say, oh, hey, how can I help you? But the most important thing is that you also communicate that people understand why you would like that or why you need something. Because, well, like I said, most people with autism spend their lives trying to hide what they really do, and that doesn't help people who would like to help you but don't know how.
One question from the remote audience.
Well, actually, it was a personal question and not one for... Yeah. First of all, thanks for all the insights. I think it was a very useful talk. What I was wondering is, how do you find an event like this? And is there anything we as organizers should do to make it more accessible for you? And I realize you're not a spokesperson for everyone on the spectrum, but...
Well, it would have been nice if I could walk around, but that's a very personal thing. But that's also a way of dealing with the stimuli, right? You find a way to deal with it, because otherwise a good one would be to click a pen numerous times. But I doubt that people would find this very...
We do have pens in the goodie bags.
No, but it's accommodate a way in which they can vent their excess energy, so to say. Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, one final question, please.
Yes, first of all, thank you for sharing. That was very interesting. This is UK-eyed, I think. Yes. I'm going to put it up a bit. I noticed you got diagnosed quite late in life, yep. 42. Maybe you can elaborate on why that was or what the trigger was for that diagnosis. Maybe there are people here that also have a worry or a fear.
Well, I got referred to a psychologist when I went through depression. And after that, or during that actually, the psychologist suggested or asked me, have you ever been tested for autism? Which I wasn't, of course, or at least not to my knowledge. And that's how that ball got rolling. I mean, you have to ask your GP or huisarts if they want to refer you to a psychologist for an autism, or well, is investigation the right word? Or, well, at least something like that. But yeah, and then you go through that, and also to give you a little bit of information, that whole process of finding out whether you have autism or not, in my case, took about 5 or 6 months. It's very exhaustive, because they have to go through a whole lot of things, because, well, as you saw, one of the key indicators for autism is that it can't be adequately explained by anything else, right? So they have to rule out a whole bunch of stuff. And in some cases, it's quite easy. And in my case, it was a little bit more difficult, because I'm so used to masking that it's second nature for me.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Bart.